So, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. So, welcome back to our Adult Ed series. This is going to be Apologetics. Is religion evil? Well, we're going to find out. But in these apologetics classes, I always like to start with like a saint, and I want to end with a one too. But so this is this guy named Alphonsus Rattenbone. So here's the odd part: he hated the Catholic Church for most of his life, and his story actually moved Maximilian Kolbe. And his story was he was born in this very wealthy family in France in 1814. And Alfonso was to become a partner in his uncle's bank. He was a non-practicing Jew. And his older brother converted to Catholicism and then became a priest. And he said this woke up this hidden rage in him against Catholicism, against all religion. And he wrote, "When my brother became a Catholic and a priest, I persecuted him with an unrelenting fury that more than other members of my family. We're completely sundered. I hated him with a virulent hatred, though he had pardoned me. This hatred for his brother broadened to include all Catholics. It led him to be an atheist, and he began to kind of feel this void in his heart. And so he kind of thought he would solve it through marriage, as many of you have. Except his bride was only like 16 years old, so he had to wait a couple years to legally marry her. So he decided, well, what do you do when you're waiting to get married? So he decided to spend a year just traveling. And he's at Naples, and he had somehow stumbled into the wrong ticket line and ended up on a steamer to Rome. So he's there, and he decides to make the best of it. And he adamantly tours Rome, museums, and he hired a guide. And one day he ran across this old classmate of his, who was an old friend who also had converted to Catholicism. And his name was Baron Theodore de Buceres, I don't know. And so I'm just going to call him the Baron. And he met with him, and the problem is he hated him for converting to Catholicism, but the conversations were very intellectually and stimulating. He loved his knowledge. So the Baron starts to show him around Rome. And then Alfonso, they get into this heated debate about Catholicism. And the Baron makes this wager with him and says, well, I tell you what, let's just try some evidence and make a bet. He said he had a miraculous medal that was very popular in the 18th century. And he says, if it's superstition, it's not going to hurt you to wear it. If you don't believe that there's a God, what difference does it make if you pray? You know, try this for 1 week, and if it makes any difference, let's just try it. So he goes into this old church, and all of a sudden, Mary appears, and these lights come from her hands. And anyhow, he said, in an instant, he knew God's love, and God was truly present in this light. And he actually converts to Catholicism and becomes a priest as well. And actually ends up becoming a missionary. But I just like the story because the goal of these classes are to learn how to defend the faith, but not to defend the faith by really arguing and putting down people. Like the Baron, he had intelligent arguments back. That's all I really want to give you guys, is some intelligent reply. But to be honest, I think love works most of all. And we have a huge RCA program. Very proud of that. Who I really want to convert are the nuns. Do you know who the nuns are? I don't mean Catholic nuns, although You know, I guess we should pray for their conversion. But the nuns are those who, on census forms, what religion are you? And they color in nun. That's the nuns. Now, here's the odd part. They did a study on nuns. This is a really weird fact. A lot of the nuns, they're not atheists. They just don't believe in religion. It's this really weird thing that many of the nuns, they do believe in God, but not religion. But religion, really in one sense, is getting attacked. And one of the memes I wanted to show, there's all these memes. There's this great meme. I saw it, but I didn't save it, and then after Mass I was too busy. But it's this picture of the Twin Towers coming down, and it says, "Look what religion has done." And then on the other side, it has a shuttle being launched, and it says, "Look what we did." And so, just if you look at it, it looks like all religions is evil. And all atheists, of course, are scientists. But, if you really examine it, you'd say, well, no, that's not really religion, number one. Number two, you don't think there's anybody who believed in God who helped put the space program on? Like, it's such an odd, strange. But if you're a younger person, you really don't think these things out. Or, I know this sounds strange, but look at some of these memes. Just want to share them. Ryan Reynolds, my God, that's the Green Lantern. Deadpool, very popular actor, sexiest man in the world, I think the year before I got it. But if you're a teenager and you have Ryan Reynolds saying religion poisons everything, that's, I don't know how to do this. This is a common phrase. This is by Dawkins. You'll find a lot of memes on this. Religion is the root of all evil. So these are all over Facebook. Here's another one. You get a lot of religion is stupid. As if there weren't some of the greatest scientists were actually Catholic religion. This is a common sticker that's put up. Religion is stupid, murderous, bigoted, and sexist. There's a whole series of this, victims of religion. A huge series of who's a victim of religion. So if you grow up in this milieu of our society, that it really does look like religion is evil. So I just don't want that light shining in my head. It brings out my bald spot. Does that make any sense? So I'd say we need to have a good reply back. And so I kind of want over the next 3 classes to go over this. And first note that there is this kind of 20th century shift. In the last few years, there's been this hard push for marketing that religion is evil. But if you divide up the 20th century into 3 parts, you can divide it beginning, middle, and end. In the early 20th century, if you were an atheist, you were considered an oddity. No presidential candidate would ever say that they didn't believe in religion. Religion was considered something decent people believed in. It is very important to have God in your life, and in almost every culture, religion prevailed. In the West, it was Christianity. Whereas the beginning of the 20th century, there was this lack of ambiguity when it came to religion that really you could say the point in the beginning of the 20th century is religion was good. In the middle of the 20th century, there's this huge change. Atheists believe, quote, with empirical investigation, we can discover natural reasons and explanations for things that were considered the great mysteries of God. So there's less ambivalence. And now there's kind of this smug pity towards religious people as being primitive. And you have it in kind of the Star Trek shows. Like I grew up in Star Trek, right? Love Star Wars, love Star Trek. But if you look at the difference between Star Trek, the original, and Star Trek, the Next Generation, the difference between Kirk and Picard, Does anybody know what I'm talking about besides, okay. So if you go back to the old Star Trek, there is almost no mention of religion. None of the crew of the Star Trek had any religion. Now, there was often an homage towards the divine. In one Star Trek, they actually had the Son of God show up, the same one. But by the time, or in the series, but by the time you get to the Star Trek The Next Generation, things have changed. Religion is something intellectually primitive people believe in. It's the way kids believe in Santa Claus. And eventually society will grow and we'll get over religion. Does that make any sense? If anybody ever see Star Trek The New Generation? That's how they treat religion. That's the middle of the 20th century. Towards the end of the 20th century, there's this huge shift. And you have the leaders of academia and the leaders of artistic institutions and cultural and actors all saying religion is evil. This was kind of really pushed by this guy named Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens. And so now the mantra is religion is evil. It's bad for your intellectual development, bad for social development, bad for social progress, and it's bad for your personal development. You find this. Now the problem is you have this being thrown out, but you don't have any evidence really countering it. And it's so pervasive. I actually recently got Netflix. Did you, anybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you see the movie Guernsey? Yes. Okay, so I love British stuff. My mother and I watched it. It's a fictional account of this one character, really story. But in the movie, there's this strange scene that in the movie there's one character who's religious, and yet she's this bitter, pharisaical innkeeper woman who's judgmental and condemning, and the only time prayer is mentioned, it's as a way of inflicting pain. Juxtaposed to that is two main characters, both women. The one the story is about is this woman who had an affair with a Nazi doctor, dies in this concentration camp, feeding victims and standing up to Nazis. But why did the movie have to make this subtle jab at the morality of religion as being condemning and spiteful? The moral hero of the movie is the woman that slept with a Nazi. The movie doesn't show Nazism really as evil. There's even handsome Nazis that you want to go to bed with. It's religious people that are shown. This is what I mean by the marketing of religion as evil. And granted, I will give you, religion has not helped itself with cover-ups and abuses, but I've already spoken publicly from the altar about like any bishop who covers up a crime should be excommunicated. That's my position. And also, like Jesus says, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better to put a millstone around your neck. If you cause harm to one of these little ones, at the last judgment, their angels, their guardian angels, will stand up and object to you entering into heaven. I already have spoken out about that. But the modern groups really are atheists who believe religion is evil, and then there's this other group, they're called spiritual agnostics. And you were wondering, well, what is a spiritual agnostic? I want to read something from The New Yorker. There's this New Yorker writer named Tori Amos. And she wrote this book on religion, and this is what she says. It's not deathless prose, but there's this phenomenon on the younger people that's called spiritual agnostics. And so this is what she says. We're well-educated skeptics. She's talking about herself and her New York friends. We regard religion as belief in unbelievable things. Our trusted tools of intellect and learning has dismantled religious belief, but now we sense there's something that eludes those trusted tools. We find that we have inexplicable metaphysical feelings. Religion starts with a question, what is true? Is this all there is? Now, unlike believers, we don't have any ready answers to the questions. But unlike atheists and older agnostics, we can't help hear the question of a possibility beyond. We have tried to answer this question, or at least muffle the question, in all the custom ways of my life. Love, achievement, stuff, therapy, but they didn't answer the question. So I wrote 2 books on science, but they didn't answer the question. In late adolescence, I dismissed all religion as an anachronistic wish fulfillment. But by middle age, I rarely recognized that religion is not only the road I haven't taken into pursuit of this answer. So just one more thing. This notion of mine that there's these inexplicable metaphysical feelings, these feelings that we hate religion, but we know there's something there. This notion still attracts odd looks in my urban professional world. Modern America's brightest and best have long encouraged to disparage the religious question and to think of churches and temples as places where your brain goes to die. But one night, I brought up God at a dinner party, I think 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. All this would have elicited what would have been brief silence and averted gazes. Now, she just goes on to say that she's saying we hate religion, but we're haunted by faith. We want to hate religion, but we're haunted by spirituality. We're very upset with religion and God, but we also want God and spirituality. So she has this smugness in her article that her and her peers are too superior for religion, but they're too deep not to crave spirituality. Smart people hate religion. Sensitive people have spirituality. So this sounds kind of strange. That's why she calls herself spiritual agnostics. And I know I'm kind of cruel, but when I meet like spiritual agnostics who say they're spiritual but not religious, I just jump to the point and I said, I get it. You hate religion. You're too smart, so you hate religion, but you're far too sensitive not to call yourself spiritual. Mm-hmm. Just have the courage to admit you're either one or the other. Anyhow, there's kind of these replies I want to just give back. And my reply one would be that. My other one would be Jesus himself in the Bible deconstructed religion savagely, repeatedly, relentlessly. He had a different motivation than destroying religion. What he was trying to do was clear the ground for a new message and start a new movement that the Old Testament pointed to. So when some people hear Jesus' critique of religion, nowhere does he lapse into spiritual but not religious. He literally says he wants to start a church. He wants to build a church. He doesn't want us to be spiritual but not religious. Yes, Jesus savagely critiques religion, and so should we. But there's this odd distinction between spiritual but not religious. But where's the line? Where can you be mad at the church and mad at God but still claim to be religious? This Tori Amos, she went over the line. She doesn't even know where the line is, as she even admits. We'd say, well, you can be critical of religion and religious at the same time, just like our founder was, Christ. Also, reply 2 is all the prophets spoke out against false religion. And any of us Catholics who are baptized, we're anointed after our baptism as priests, prophets, and kings. We're anointed as prophets to speak out against injustice. We're anointed to speak out against false religion as part of our religion. Does that make any sense? She just does it out of smugness. We'd say, no, it's a religious duty. So when and where did religion get marketed as evil? I want to look at that. Because in modern times, it really comes down, by modern times, I mean the last 500 years. Well, that's modern for me. But it really comes from 4 guys, Freud, Marx, Nietzsche, and Hawkins. So, I want to talk about them, but their arguments are just kind of regurgitated among the new atheists. These 4 guys critiqued religion in their time period, And you'll still hear it today on those who hate religion. So Freud and Marx and Nietzsche, they're fairly passé. Dawkins is very popular among the non-scientific crowd. Anybody who has a real science background often mocks Dawkins. I know several people, because he misuses and misstates on religion. But let's start with Freud's criticism. Freud looked at religious people, and he compared it to how a child relates to an angry parent with guilt. They see that there's some things that are morally bad, but they want to do them. So they invent this God who can be placated with prayer and offerings to justify their darker impulses. Freud says religious people can fool themselves, saying, my conscience is fine, I paid my dues, I paid my debt, but they really don't want to change their lives. They want to justify their lives. So they create this mean, punishing God, and therefore religion, and he says is basically psychological self-justification. And what's the fruit of it? But either smugness, self-righteousness, or feeling of being very righteous, or insecure, all to give you an excuse to do immoral acts. So Freud says, Freud says, God didn't create you, you created God. And you created a God that psychologically you can placate, so that you can buy and do immoral things and all the while pretend like you're moral. So religion for Freud is for hypocrites. Well, my reply would be this, except first of all, if you're talking about Freud dealt with very rich, self-absorbed clients who are not known for being religious. So I question where he got his evidence. It was all from lives of irreligious people. If you want to examine religious people to critique religion, shouldn't you actually look at people who are practicing religion, which Freud didn't do? So whenever somebody critiques religious people, ask specifically who they're talking about. Not all religious people are hypocrites. And what about religious people who really sacrifice out of love and spend their time doing good for others? Look at Mother Teresa. Now, Richard Dawkins says Mother Teresa was a horrible person. So he has this, but really I don't see him giving up his wealthy life. Or one of my nephews, he smokes a lot of pot, but he's called an atheist, and he always makes these slurs towards, he's the one nephew who's not really thriving, but he makes these slurs against religion and against religious people. And I said, so my answer back is, you mean like Nana? My mother, Nana, is very, very sweet. My mother, Nana, moved out of her house so that he could have a house for him and his kids. This is who she sacrificed a great deal so that you have a house. They're renting her house. So that you have a house. Otherwise, you would have been in an apartment. Is this the religious people that you're criticizing? I want to know who they are. It's just a straw man that they've come up with. That would be my first reply. And my other is, no institution in history has done more for feeding the poor, educating, or healthcare than the Catholic Church. You go to any third world country, and who the heck do you think is going to feed you and take care of you? It's the Catholic Church. I don't see atheists out there starting schools and feeding programs, or healthcare like we do. So it's very fine if you live in a wealthiest country in history, the United States, to claim evil is religion, religion is evil, but for the needy, we're the ones making it. My second reply is that all Freud's psychological theories have been proven wrong. Why wouldn't this one been proven wrong? Third, our religion already taught that there are hypocrites among us. Freud's insight is not new. It's 3,000 years old. Religion demands that you're able to distinguish between faith and hypocrisy. That actually starts in the book of Genesis. Leviticus mentions it, all the way up to the teachings of Christ. Now, A sinner and a hypocrite are not the same thing. That drives me up the wall when somebody confuses that. Hypocrisy and being a sinner are not the same thing. A sinner is, well, somebody like her, or me or you, but a hypocrite is somebody who uses religion as a smokescreen to commit evil. I may be a sinner, but I'm not using religion to commit sins. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So eliminating religion would not remove hypocrisy. In fact, real religion tries to expose hypocrisy. So does that make any sense? Like, if that's what Freud is worried about, then you should be religious. Jesus Christ says every single place where he comes up against somebody who uses religion to justify their greed, he cuts them down and says you can't justify yourself. Remember how he slams the lawyer who says, what do I have to do to be saved? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And then he wants to justify himself. So he tries to create loopholes. That's when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. There are no loopholes. If you're religious, you expose hypocrisy. We may be sinners, but we're not hypocrites. Or in the letter of James, he says, pure, undefiled religion is to care for widows and the orphans in their affliction. And then my fourth one is this. Freud says there's psychological reasons people claim that there is a God, right? That's what he's saying. Well, why not use that yardstick against him? My fourth reply is there are psychological reasons to say religion is evil. Huxley, this very famous writer, what's his name? Aldous. I know I don't pronounce it right, but I'm just going to call him Al. Al Huxley. We went to university. He was a young philosopher student, and he said, when I studied the possibility that there is no God, I just started having sex. And he's very open about this. I started having sex and I realized, if the Bible is true, I would have to stop. And he looked at all the various possibilities and he said he had a very powerful seduction to say, there is no God, religion is evil. Another guy, I really admire his work, Francis Collins. I mentioned he wrote the book, The Language of God. He won the prize for mapping the human genome, right? And for him, biology is the language of God. It's a spiritual event. But he also became a minister. But in this book, it's kind of on biology, he says, in college, I was an atheist. And he says, you know why I was an atheist? I wanted to have a lot of sex. And I wanted to have it without any sort of moral repercussions. So I simply said, there is no God. Religion is evil. I'm free. Now, you know the whole story. He has a child, and he says it's science who converted him to believe in God. So now he's actually not just an incredible scientist. He was on 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago. But he said, it was just me psychologically trying to justify I wanted to sleep around. But if I really looked at the evidence, even as a scientist with DNA, I am awestruck at God. The problem is you have psychological reasons for believing in God, but you have even more psychological reasons for denying God. If Freud is right to say that God is just a way of justifying your behavior, how much more true is it to say there is no God to justify your behavior? To say religion is evil may be just to justify your own actions. Does that make any sense? So, yes. Yeah, but my problem with that is that, okay, if you want to believe that, that's fine, but nowhere do you really find that in the Bible. So they're a theist, right? So they're a theist, but they don't believe in organized religion. But human beings are very social. I'm giving you my short answer. Human beings are incredibly social. The reason why religion survives is that people in history did not say, I'm just a spiritual being. Buddhism is a religion. Now, whether it does or does not believe in God is always a question, but it's a religion that it creates really an institution to pass on that faith. Like I would say, my short answer to that is we're an incredibly social beings. To pass on that spirituality, you need an institution, whether it's Catholicism or Buddhism. So I'd say there's something unhuman about your answer to say, oh no, it's just all about me. That's my short answer. Okay, Marx. Marx sees people using religion for not quite the same reason. Marx comes along and says, now wait a minute. I see people getting involved in religion not to psychologically justify themselves, but to sociologically justify themselves. So Marx's famous phrase is, and there's plenty of memes on this, religion is the opium of the people. Now that sounds a lot worse when you have to remember that what opium was like. Opium was not a pleasure narcotic like vodka. You know what opium was? It was anesthesia. Opium was a painkiller. And so what he's saying is that here you have these oppressed people, and these people are hurting. And of course, religion is being used to mask their symptoms. Marx says people use religion sociologically to justify their own imperialism. For the lower class, religion used to say, hey, you shouldn't expect to be happiness and justice on earth. Life is bad, and therefore just live a good life, and in heaven you'll have a good time. Except, here's the odd part. Freud and Marx came up with their theories without ever looking at the evidence. All the evidence is that those who regularly practice religion and meditate test out to be happier, healthier, and more successful in marriage and their relationships. If religion is evil, why does it make us happier and healthier and more stable? It's not an opiate. In fact, it doesn't mask pain, it frees us from it. Religion is not an opiate, but the smelling salts that wakes us up to life. My second reply is evidence about opioids is not against religion, but against those who don't practice religion. And what I mean by that is this. Look at the opioid epidemic. You're less likely to be addicted if you practice religion. Now, think about how bad the opiate addiction is in the United States. More than 115 people die in the United States every day to opioids. Maybe religion is not an opioid. Maybe religion is the cure for it. Practicing religion is the opposite of an opioid. It's part of the cure. Does that make sense? Now, I want to start talking about Nietzsche in this regard, because the Nietzsche and the Marx thing kind of has some of the same answers. Nietzsche is a little bit different. He critiques religion on people's motivation. And so, like, he would sign his letters sometimes, squintingly yours, Friedrich Nietzsche. I just would like to sign my letter squintingly yours. And basically it means you really have to critique things. And he concludes that religion is for the weak. Nietzsche looks at everybody, not just religious people, but everybody, even Freud and Marx. He looks at them and says, you say you know what justice is. You say you know what's right. You say you know what's wrong. You say you know what love is. But he looks at them kind of squintingly and says, but wait a minute. You tell everybody to love, but how loving are you? And he says, you're calling everybody to love, but you're motivated to keep people from revolting. It's just to keep people in the status quo. And so he calls this the hermeneutics of suspicion. And Nietzsche says that religion calls for revolution, but basically sets up another set of dictators, another set of people in power, another set of people that have the money and influence that will just trample on you. So he says religion in anybody is basically just a power trip. Nietzsche says religion is just a way of accruing power and results in abuse. It's kind of like the movie Shawshank Redemption, if you saw that movie, where you have the warden who's this Bible-thumping, evangelical. And the warden's sense of religion is just like Nietzsche's description. It's about power over the weak. He uses religion to exploit the prisoners. Or anytime there's a movie with the Catholic Church, you always have the cardinals, living with their mistresses in gold. I've got to become a cardinal. Religion is just about the misuse of power. So my reply to that, Nietzsche's argument that religion is for the weak or religion is about just another power trip, my first reply is a commandment not to take the Lord's name in vain. Sometimes it is very true that some people misuse religion for power, but that's the exception, not the rule. When God gives Moses the commandment not to take the Lord's name in vain, this is one of the top big 10 mortal sins. And I have to say, I really object. I hate it when people dumb it down to a first grade level of, oh, don't say GD. That's not equivalent to murdering somebody. That's cussing. I'm against cussing, so not that I'm perfect on it, but taking the Lord's name in vain is not about cussing. Now, if you meet my mother, I want you to tell her he came out hard against cussing. But taking the Lord's name is far more serious than just cussing. Taking the Lord's name in vain. The name of God is not God, by the way. That's his job description. And nor does it say the Lord's name in vain. It says take the Lord's name in vain. Taking the Lord's name in vain is to misuse religion for power. In the 10 Commandments, when that one's listed, God says, you do that and I will not forget it. That's one that God really hates. It's to use religion for power and abuse. And yes, some people take the Lord's name in vain without ever saying a cuss word. So sorry, Nietzsche, God already condemned taking the Lord's name in vain and being suspicious of religion 3,000 years ago. Where God and Nietzsche differ is that God never says all religion takes the Lord's name in vain. He just wants us to be wary of other people who do it. God admits that some people misuse religion for power and wealth, but God never says all religion does it. Jesus warns against Nietzsche's critique of religion when he says to the Pharisees, oh, you tithe mint and cumin. You go to church, you fulfill all the laws, but you devour the houses of the poor. That's Nietzsche's definition of religion. Jesus used it, and Jesus condemns it. Moses, when he's leading the people, you have a rebellion, Cornac, who tries to rebel. He just wants power. All the prophets of Amos and Isaiah say, if there is a God who you use to oppress the poor, it's not God. Jesus turns around and says that you're the real Messiah. What does he say? He says, what do you see? The poor be given hope, the blind see. So God is the first person who actually critiques the misuse of religion for power, not Nietzsche and the modern atheists. Nietzsche is right. If religion is about power over other people, it is evil. And that's what God says. So that's my first reply. My second is that even if it's true that some people get involved in religion for power, religion itself believes in conversion. So I'll give you an example. There's a great story of this holy figure who was in the Vatican. He was a bureaucrat in Vatican, living very nicely. After Vatican II, he's so against it because he hates that theology of the people and caring for the people. He became so disruptive. They sent him back to South America. And he's put in this parish that has all these poor peasants who are literally getting killed. And he ends up falling in love with these people and advocating for the poor. And he himself ends up getting martyred for the poor. So, yes, he's kind of interesting. He himself admitted that he became a priest for power and luxury, but he ends up a martyr. Yes, misusing religion for power is wrong, but we also believe religion can lead to a conversion. I have many stories. Another one is this priest I worked with when I was in the seminary. He was in a parish, and Anyhow, he was a wild thing. He loved his people, super smart. And I was talking to this bishop at this reception, and they said, well, what are you doing for your pastoral year of work? And I said, oh, I'm working with Father so-and-so. And he says, oh my goodness, you're kidding. He said, I went to the seminary with him. I said, oh, that's neat. He says, oh yeah, everybody thought that he would become a bishop. What happened to him? And so the next week when I was working with him, I said, oh, guess what happened? And I tell him the story. And he laughs. And he says, yeah, that's true. He said, I played the game. I went to Rome. He never went to any classes. He was very smart, but you don't have to go to classes if you go to Rome. And he says, I spent all my time in coffee shops and museums and schmoozing people in the Vatican. I wanted to become a bishop. I played the game really well. And he says the night of his ordination, he suddenly has this panic attack because he's going to be ordained a priest. And he said, if I play this game the rest of my life, I'll have to lie every day, schmooze, make contacts. So he said the night of his ordination, he suddenly had this huge change of heart that he decided, you know what I really want to be? A priest, not a bishop. So he said to me, he said, when you choose to get ordained, you better decide whether you want to be a bishop or a priest. And if you choose to be a priest, then serve your people with all your heart. Now, the reason why I tell the story is that, yeah, he might have entered the seminary because he wanted power, but somewhere along the line, he was converted. So you can, like Nietzsche may be right, but you have all these stories of people that point to the fact that the religion is self-correcting, but atheism doesn't demand any conversion. Religion always demands deeper and deeper conversions. Atheism doesn't demand anything. So at least my second reply is that, yeah, sometimes religion is about power, but religion is self-correcting. My third is this comment Nietzsche himself made about self-discipline. Nietzsche was this fierce critic of Christianity, but oddly, sometimes admired the Catholic Church, that he believed for somebody to reach their uniqueness, they must have self-discipline. And the Catholic Church is this institution that does teach self-discipline. For somebody who wants to achieve, quote unquote, their uniqueness, they must be able, he said, to subordinate themselves for a larger goal. And the Catholic Church taught that. Protestantism, they teach that it's the individual's chance to go to heaven. Catholicism teaches, no, you learn self-discipline now for the higher purpose of making a difference here on earth. Not just to get into heaven, but to make a difference here. And if religion is evil, because it's just another power over people's lives, then admiring the power of self-discipline means religion offers a different type of power than Nietzsche admired. Does that make sense? There's more than just power over other people. And another one would be meekness. Nietzsche taught that the most important thing in life was power. Real religion teaches power is not what's most important. Now, the Nietzsche philosophy, if you know this, of the strong man, it led to Nazism. Nazism is built on this idea of power and the strong man. Religion teaches that a beautiful life is not about gaining power, but about serving others and justice and virtue. And one of those virtues is meekness. The opposite of a hunger for power, being a bully, or the opposite also of being abused by power, a victim, is the sweet spot of the virtue of meekness. I neither crave power, nor can I be a victim of being powerless. There's studies on effect of power on people. People who crave power and get power, it is like steroids for your worst faults. Nietzsche missed this observation. In his hermeneutics of suspicion, he never bothered to look at what power does historically to people. Now, the opposite is true too. Being powerless, being a victim of society, really shortens your life and has all these ill effects. But somebody with meekness, They're unaffected by power. They're unaffected by a lack of power. The healthiest position, based on social sciences, is actually the virtue of meekness. It's advocated by religion. It is not advocated by atheists. It's unthought of by Nietzsche. In fact, Nietzsche ends up going insane. Maybe striving after power is not the right position to go after in life. But religion says, make life beautiful here. Nietzsche said, make life about a power struggle, them versus us. He's right. Then it's just another authoritarian system. But oftentimes, the critics of Nietzsche who promote this idea that religion is bad makes me wonder, what do they consider a beautiful life? To me, what Nietzsche says is important in life is power. But to me, that's just another way of being self-involved. There's other power besides dominating other people. There's self-discipline and meekness. And my fifth reply would be hope. Religion is a different type of power that Nietzsche never really thought about. It gives the power of self-discipline, promotes meekness, but also gives the power of hope. And there's this article that was written actually in the 1920s by Howard Thurman, and it wrote about how black spirituals gave hope to the slaves. Now, the songs were filled with all these imageries of these new roles and dignity and crowns of gold and having a true home, and that in the end there will be this final judgment against injustices and the resurrection of the free. Religion wasn't an opiate that kept them docile. Religion was another source of power. Well, was not another source of power to control them. It was a power that freed them from abusive control. Religion gave them a faith to gain a dignity despite the cruelest of lives. So Howard Thurman writes this and says, faith gave them hope. It gave them this terrible right to live despite everything in their world saying that they were disposable. It gave them a power and a hope that the slave owner couldn't touch. All the evidence of their horrible existence would have told them that the world is hopeless, but their faith gave them hope and joy. It gave them a hope that couldn't be crushed. And why? Because hope is in the future. It can't be touched by the slave owner. It does crack me up that you have somebody like Karl Marx who lived a very comfortable life, but rarely actually worked, to tell those who had hard lives that faith is an opiate. Or could you imagine somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's lived a very comfortable, painless life in academia, going back in time and telling slaves, if you could only get a better education in a nice Ivy League college, life would be better. He'd have to tell them that there is no meaning in life, that faith is an illusion, that there's no real thing as justice, evil will never be held accountable, there's nothing that will ever hold evil accountable, there's no real thing as morality, there's no innate dignity in being a human being. That's Richard Dawkins' position. For the slave, for the poor, faith was a power that gave them dignity and an unconquerable hope, despite a horrible life. Now, this doesn't prove that God exists, but it does prove that faith is not an opiate, that faith gives people a power to endure hopeless situations. Why is it that atheists who lived very safe, comfortable lives likes to tell people who have hard lives that faith doesn't matter? All an atheist knows is that their faith doesn't matter. Their lack of it doesn't give them any meaning. It doesn't give them any power. But look at the great stories just of the United States. Harriet Tubman, who makes all these trips back and forth. She was called a Moses. Her faith gave her a power stronger than the slaveholder. Or early Christians who were persecuted. We're a persecuted religion for 300 years. Faith gave us hope to endure. Or Judaism. The faith starts with Hebrew slaves who had a hope despite being really powerless against Egypt. Or Martin Luther King or the Civil Rights Movement. It was a religious movement, Modern people like to represent the civil rights movement as a political movement. It was first a religious movement. Martin Luther trained themselves to pray, to harness the power of love. They had these practice sessions with prayer and practice sessions with people screaming and showing indignity, and you weren't allowed to hate the person who's persecuting you. You weren't allowed to react in hatred. The bus boycott was more of a religious sacrifice. Religion is a smelling salts that wake us up to justice, empower us with hope, and forms us in a community. So I'd say no, Nietzsche, faith is just a different power. My sixth reply to anybody who says religion's a power trip, Nietzsche says any truth claim is a power trip. Any group that says this is what the truth is trying to put you under their thumb. But here's the problem. There's no greater power trip than to say that every truth claim is a power trip, but mine. Now, here's an example. This woman wrote Chronicles of a Higher Education back about 5 years ago. She's this anthropologist. She's a lady committed to 20th century Nietzscheism, hermeneutics of suspicion. Now, she was a Marxist. She wasn't a Marxist. And of course, she wasn't a Freudian because she saw that those who had total universal claims of truth, they got rid of all that. This is what we've gotten rid of all that. You see, because any truth claim, even Marxism, was essentially religion. Why? Because they say that to say you have the truth is morally wrong. So, well, anyhow, she's disillusioned by all that. She's bought into this Nietzschean idea that all truth claims are culturally relative, and no one possesses any truth. So she's an anthropologist studying in Africa, and she sees women getting abused in sexual slavery. Still is a problem in Africa. But she sees these women being oppressed. She sees these women in conditions, and she writes an article, and she says, all my life I've committed to this idea that all truth claims are power plays, and no one has the right, one culture, to tell another culture what they should do, because it's a power trip. But I'm seeing in Africa is evil. Women getting raped, women getting used as slave prostitutes. But when she goes to the governments in Africa and says what she wants to do something about, what do they say? They said, you're just imposing your Western individualist ideas on us. You call it sexual slavery. That's not how we see it. And so they accuse her, that's your power trip. So in this article, she says that all truth claims are a power trip was the biggest power trip of all times. Some things in life are evil. And it was a way of saying that there is no truth was a way of keeping people down. Does that make sense? So I'd say, well, that's a great reply. Sometimes if you live a very Western, comfortable life, you're not used to looking into the face of evil. Some things are true. But now we're coming to an end. So I wanted to mention this. I like having some replies back, and we can open up to this questions in a second. Well, no, I'm going to do that. So what I want in your table discussions, answer this. Which of these arguments have you heard? I know I mentioned 3 people. I didn't mention Dawkins, but I'm saving him. Which one have you heard the most when you say religion is evil? Is it the Freudian idea that it's just a game you play to do whatever you want? The Marx idea, just a justification of imperialism? Or is it the Nietzsche idea? That's just a power trip. So talk among yourselves. I'll be right back. All right, why don't we get back together and just of those arguments, has anybody had any experience of the attack of religion as evil that they want to share? Rob. Rob was at his second church called Starbucks.
And I was wearing this T-shirt, and the guy came up to me and he said, that's an interesting shirt. And I said, yeah, I kind of like it.
Okay, he's wearing a T-shirt that says Catholic Veteran.
And he said, I
And the guy comes up and says, I don't believe in God.
I asked him, describe to me the God you don't believe.
And he said, describe to me the God you don't believe in. So he asked him, what kind of God do you believe in? And he said, it was a typical God, the punishing evil God. And Rob's reply was, well, I don't believe in that God either. And then they had a discussion of that, of what kind of God Rob believes in. But it's such a straw man image of God, that God is this punishing, horrible. Really, you think we survive? As I like to say, we've done so much good in the world, not because God is angry at us, but because God is love. Okay, yes.
No, I was just going to say, but so many of
Mitzi.
us-
Well, that's why bad things happen in the world, but that's a larger supply. No, my God is love, and God gives us the power to endure awful things. He doesn't cause them. In fact, at one point in the Bible, he says, "Oh no! You're the ones who invented poverty and cruelty and war. That's not my invention. That's yours." Yeah, why? Yeah.
Emotional thing there, like he wants to talk about it. That's
So Angel says, if the guy that came up and talked to Rob, emotionally he did want to talk about it.
that's what I mean.
So I just want to end with, because we're coming up to an hour, one last story. And I just think there's good replies back to these arguments. We're going to continue for a couple more weeks, a couple more weeks. But I actually think the best apologetic answer is actually mercy. And maybe people hate religion or say religion is evil, maybe because they want to justify some selfish behavior. Or maybe because, for many reasons, they could hate themselves. And there's a story I like. And this story is about this priest who goes to this hospital. He goes to the hospital, and then when he's there, he meets this Polish nun. And this Polish nun says, trying to get through to the guy in that room, he wants nothing to do with religion. He's very angry. And so the nun says, would you please go in there? So the guy goes into the room, and he's Polish too, but he goes into the room. The guy is just spitting angry at religion, God, get out. The priest gave it a shot, starts to leave. The nun comes back and says, would you mind just trying one more time? Just one more time. He's going to die. Just give it one more time. So the priest goes in, and when he goes in the room, he starts to pray the divine mercy. And when he says, for the sake of your sorrowful passion, have mercy on the whole world, the guy gets upset and explodes and says, there is no such thing as forgiveness, and I can't be forgiven. And he said, what do you mean you can't be forgiven? And the guy tells this story that he's done something horrible in his life, that there's no hope. And he says, well, what did you do? And he says, well, I was an alcoholic. And he was in charge of a train, what do you call that? Switch. And where you stop the traffic. And he said he was drinking and fell asleep. And this car goes through and gets hit by a train and kills the parents and the child. He killed the family. All three of them died. And he said, when did this happen? And he gives the date, and he says, that was my family. I was sick, and I had to stay with my grandmothers. My family was going out. And says, if I can forgive you, why can't God forgive you? So the guy, he actually makes this breakthrough with the guy. And really, it's a great story of forgiveness and power. And so anyhow, he wants to find the Polish nun. And the hospital says, we don't have any Polish nuns that work here. And he sees this image of, what is her name? Faustina. And that was a Polish nun who he saw. So I know it's a strange story, but I like the idea that wow, it was really mercy. People can have their arguments back and forth, why they hate God, but I just think mercy is a great apologetic as well. So we'll continue with more religion is evil. Next week we're going to, and this is a common one, that religion is the greatest source of violence. More wars have been fought over religion than anything else, which is a total lie. But we'll talk about that one. And by the way, Greg, where are you guys going? I heard you guys are getting kicked out of town. Where are you going? Where are you go? Where did you say first? Oh, Western Europe. Oh. All right. Well, good luck, you guys. See you next week.